Hello, it's Duncan. Here on Team Gilded Rose, we're in the middle of a refactor to help us understand what things can fail. So we'd like to communicate about the errors that can happen when we are reading our stock list, which is pretty much all we do at the moment. The place we got to last episode was that when an error happens when we create an item, we return null rather than an item. And we push that nullability all the way out to the handler. But the problem is that we don't know what failed, just that something failed if we have a null. All we can say is there was something that went wrong, and so we have a null. And we'd like to fix that. It's going to take quite a time to fix, but let's go on the next step. Now, you can think of item ? Here as nullable item. Well, that's the way we think of it. But also another way to think of it is as item or null. And as Nat and I explained in our book, a nice way of thinking of error handling is a function that returns the thing it actually wants to return or something else. In this case, it's item or null, but it could be item or something that describes what went wrong. So with that in mind, let's add in an error handling library and see where that takes us. We're going to go to our Gradle build file and add in result for k. Why result for k? Well, because Nat wrote it and we're rather used to using it. Let's refresh our build and just check that our test still passed before we go on. Good. Now let's think about that nullability in terms of an error type. What we can do is we're going to duplicate this and we will create a version called create. And this one can't be an operator because create isn't an operator name. And in this version, instead of returning an item ? We're going to return a result. And the easy thing to do is use result for k here. And that result is either an item or it's null. Now, what's the type of null? Well, pop quiz, the answer is nothing ? is the type of null. Either item or nothing, you can think of result as either. So either item or nothing is the equivalent of item ? Now there are two subtypes of result, and they are success or failure. So we need to wrap the base thing in one of these. So when it goes right, we'll wrap it in the success, and when it goes wrong, we'll wrap it in failure. Okay, well that can pass at least. Now what we want to do is start using this version in place of this version. And a sneaky way of doing that is to implement this version in terms of this version. What does that look like? Well, we can call create in here, passing it the parameters that we know. And then we need to look inside and see whether it's success or failure. If it is success, we want to return the item inside. And if it's failure, we want to return null. And luckily, result for k has an operation that does that, and it's called or null. We take this out. It actually turns out to be called value or null. That will do us. Okay, so now any code that we've got that calls this invoke will be exercising this version for us. So let's run that. Okay, so it works, at least as far as we can tell. And now let's go and find these callers, and we can inline them to use this version. So let's go off and find callers of this. You can't see it because it's underneath that picture of me. Let's inline this one. Not quite as easy as that. We have to replace this with invoke. Doesn't seem to be a thing we can do, but we'll write it in by hand. That, and then we can inline that version. Okay. Look at this now. When we build items in our tests, we're going to call the create version, get the value of null, and if that is null, then we're going to raise an error. There's a little shortcut for this. We can say on failure, and that will unwrap and just call the function inside here. So that is effectively the same thing, just not going to a nullable in the mid-time. Okay, where else do we call this? Well, here in our test, we actually call item invoke. So let's inline that one. You can see that works. But what we'd really like to say here is not assert null, but we'd like to check that the thing we get out is failure. So we can do that by changing this test. This will be assert equals. What do we expect? We expect a failure because create returns a error type. We expect a failure with a null inside it if we call create on null, given that negative quality. Import that. And let's run that. Okay, good. Now, there's only one left, and we're not seeing it for some reason in our list, but seem to remember it's in persisting. Here again is our fake constructor. Replace it with invoke and inline it. And check that does the same thing. Good. Now let's check we have no uses of this invoke. That's empty. What we can do now is we can delete that one and rename this one to be invoke. Call this invoke. Now we can make it an operator. Go back to our callers and have them call the constructor again. Again, it's not actually a constructor, it just looks like one. Run those tests, and that all builds nicely. I think that's probably a good place to check in. So we're going to use result for k as return type of item. Creator, I'm going to call it. Okay, 3 little warnings, probably imports. 1, 2, 3. Run again and commit. Good, that's the first stage. Now, the places that build items, we have the tests, which we don't mind failing at runtime. And with the actual code in persisting here. Now, previously we passed the nullability up. So let's do that again here. So what was our formulation? It was result for k of item or nothing question mark, which allows us to put in a null. We do that, then we can take out this bit because that is the type of that, and that will just break something in here. Okay. Now, previously, the type of this items was a list of items that might be null. But now, the type of it is a list of results. Now, we don't really want a list of results. What we'd like is a list of items. So I think what we're going to do is, as we go through and map here, let's say that what we want is a list of item. But as we go through and do line to item, we'll say, if we got a failure in that, then we would like to return null for our stock list, because that's what we were doing before. And note that we can play this little game because of Kotlin inline functions. So we can actually return out of the middle of a map. So it's a little bit nasty, but it'll go away in time. So let's suspend disbelief and That means that we can get rid of this first branch of the if, just returning our stock list. And we don't have to filter not null because there will be no nulls in there. So we've collapsed our results down as we did the map. Just check that actually works. And reformat while we go. It does. Now we push on and say, if we're going to have this formulation for what we are returning, we might as well use it here as well. So what we really want to do here is return a result of a stock list or nothing question mark from here. How would we do that? Well, we know that if we're failing in here, previously returning null, that the equivalent to null in our current thinking is failure containing a null. And we have to wrap our normal stock list in success. To say that was successful. And we can just pass that little pane onto the file load items, changing the return type. That will then break something outside here. And it is here. Now in stock, when we load the stock list, now our load items is an error type. So we can do the same thing here. Set an equivalent, as we said, a question mark colon is dot on failure. In fact, not on failure, it is to recover in this case. Recover allows us to specify something to do. So we recover and we return null. Again, it's a little bit ugly, but it will get better. Here we are in our fixture. We had the same issue here. We're asking stock file. So we can say recover with an error of load. And in this case, recover and on failure will be the same thing. Okay, now our tests are failing. Why is that? Let's go and have a little look. And here you can see that we are saying that when we take an empty sequence of strings and convert it to a stock list, then we get back a stock list, but actually we know we get back a successive stock list now. So we've changed the type. So we'll just go through and make that change. Let's try that. And that fixed everything. Now let's go back and find the callers of load items. The important one is our stock list here. We have one last place to push up, and that is this is also going to be a result of stock list or null. What does that mean here? Well, it means we have to return failure. And here we need to return success. So it's not as convenient as Nullable, but it will allow us to migrate a little bit later on. That should have broken callers. There we are. And in the same way as we did when we had the null, we need to go and fix up the list handler to say, when you list, you give an instant and you get back not a nullable stock list now, but a result of a stock list or the type of null. And once again here, we can say on failure, we have an error. Run that. Now here, again, some failing tests. And again, they will be because we are actually talking to that code. So here we have stock list. We've changed the type of that. Now, previously we said we could change this to success of the expected version. The other thing we could do, and we'll put it in here so we can see it, is we could just say value or null in here. So that's a little bit easier to cut and paste. So we'll use it in all these places. Let's try that. One more we missed right at the beginning. Okay then. So what have we done? Well, we've taken something that was returning something that was nullable. This fake constructor here. And we said instead of returning a nullable, we'll return a result that's either a thing or null, which is, as I say, almost the same as nullable, but a bunch less convenient. What it does allow us to do, though, is put an actual object in here, not just null. And an actual object will allow us to convey information about what went wrong. Remember, the nice thing about exceptions is they have a type and a toString, and we can put that into logs in order to establish why something went wrong. At the moment here, all we know is that something went wrong, but we've no idea what. When we get a null, we go, oh, it didn't work, but I don't know why. So that's why we're not going to push this to production, but we will commit it. So this is useResult 4K as return type of other functions. One warning, always an import. Commit that. Okay, good. This relationship between a result and a nullable type is a little bit brain achy. So I think we will stop this refactoring today and come back to it in the next episode where we'll add information into those results. If you'd like to see that episode, then you could click the subscribe button and maybe even like this video. And if you have liked this video, then you will probably like the book that I wrote with Nat Price called Java to Kotlin, a Refactoring Guidebook, details of which are in the show notes below. Thank you for watching.